This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with Jessica Hagy about the habit of publishing every day, the advertising voice, and Twitter. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Jessica Hagy. Jessica Hagy is an artist and writer best known for her Webby award-winning blog Indexed. Her work combines data with humor, insight, and simple visuals to make even the most complex concepts immediately accessible and relevant. Her books include The Art of War Visualized, Indexed, and How to Be Interesting. And her latest is The Hustle Economy, Transforming Creativity into a Career. And it's my great pleasure to have Jessica join us today. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So share with everyone what's going on in your world just now.
What's going on? Gosh, I've just put out some work for some clients, got that off the table. I'm figuring out my back-end blog sites, and I have like 5 articles due this week. So it's a pretty busy Monday so far.
And how did you, I mentioned kind of very briefly about the kind of work that you do as an artist and a writer, but how did you arrive at the work that you're known for today?
Actually, it was almost on accident. A long time ago, I read that every artist needs a blog. And so I thought, okay, I can put up a blog. But I didn't want to write like, oh, this is how my breakfast was, or this is some silly thing. So I started drawing graphs on index cards. And I thought, okay, now I've got a blog, nothing to worry about, check that box. And the blog became really popular. And people really liked these little funny graphs I was drawing. And somehow that went from something I just sort of threw up on the internet thinking, okay, I've got a blog now, to what I do for a living. And it's been a really interesting sort of process.
And at the start, was it always you're known for like publishing every day, well, 5 days a week anyway. Was that always right from the start, or was that something that just kind of gradually evolved to doing the publishing every day?
When I started it, I just had like a handful of them, maybe 10 or 12, and I just popped them up on the internet. And then all of a sudden people were looking for more. So I started putting up more and more. And my agent said, okay, let's do 1 a day and give it a regular schedule so you can not worry about when things go up and all that. And I've been keeping to that for almost 10 years now.
Wow. So 10 years of doing that work every day. And do you tend to batch your work, or actually, are you kind of really doing it every single day? Putting those Venn diagrams, those XY graphs with simple punchlines, so kind of what you're known for. Are you doing that every day, or do you tend to batch it?
I try to set down some time on Sundays and draw up a whole bunch of them, and then select the ones I like for the week. So I try and do it weekly, but every now and then something just, I'm like, oh, I have to address this topic, and I'll just draw that one, put that one up that day.
And then when you came to the book, The Art of War Visualized, which is a very successful book. I know a lot of people, I can't remember the first person that told me about it. It might have been Hugh MacLeod, possibly, the artist. You changed your style from your kind of typical index cards to a kind of much bolder style. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, so I had seen The Art of War, and I was like, oh, this looks really neat. So I started drawing it index style, and then my agent said, oh, this is a good book. Let's put that together. But thinking about translations and different places to put it, The Art of War really seemed more visually and punchy. So I started painting with India ink to get the structures of the graph, and then filled in the words with fonts so that when the book is translated, it could be easily translated into other languages because of the font.
Ah, I see. And then kind of as that has kind of developed, is this something that you plan on kind of using for kind of subsequent books as well?
I might. A lot of clients ask for graphs and charts, and sometimes they don't really want it to look like I did it. They want it to look like their own branded material. So I've actually done the charts in lots of different formats. A lot of the times I'm invisible, so you can tell that it's a graph or a chart that tells a little story, but it doesn't look like my handwriting. So it's done in Photoshop, and it's done with very different styles and different fonts and different colors and all that. So I've been over time, I've gotten really sort of not too uptight about how it looks, but as long as it suits the project.
And I'm guessing as your work became more popular, a lot of other artists approached you and just talked about how to make a career from doing, how to make a living from doing the kind of work that you do. So when you speak to those people, those artists who want to make a living from their creativity and from as artists and the kind of design work that they do, what advice do you generally give them?
I'd say if you're putting your portfolio together, try not to be overly broad. Don't have 10 different pieces to show your range. Have 10 pieces that all look and feel similar, because people are going to call you because you are that person that does that thing, not because you can make anything look like anything. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. So you kind of get known as a style. So it's almost like I think of someone like a musician, for example, like a session musician. The top session musicians are brought in because they have a sound. They add something to it. I mean, oh, that's cool, Jill, because she has this kind of sound, and she's the one that we get for that particular session.
Right, and a lot of times too, if you're let's say you're just a graphic designer and you've been working with so many brands and different companies and all of that, you have to have that range of work. But when you do put your portfolio together, you'll see that you have sort of patterns emerging. So are you humorous about it? Are you really classy? Are you minimalist? And once you can sort of identify those terms and talk about your work that way, you'll be able to sell it better too. So it also has to sound like something. It can't just look like something, because once people have the words to use to ask for it, they will.
And where do your new ideas for, you're publishing pretty much every day. Where do those ideas generally come from? Where do you go for inspiration? And then where does it, talk to us about, where the start of it, the inception of it, and how you go about kind of developing that into a final idea that you're actually happy to put up on the site?
I take notes a lot and I eavesdrop a lot. And sometimes just finding like one really fun word, like a weird adjective or a silly turn of phrase, and just sort of playing with that. I do like grammar and using the charts as for sort of sentence structures. So if I have a good sentence and I can turn that good sentence into a chart, that's usually a solid start for me.
And how do you, because you're having to constantly kind of create all the time, so you're listening to those little fragments of conversations that are going on as well. What about, and so your kind of style is kind of well known for the kind of style that you do on Indexed. How are you ever tempted, like, go, actually, I want to do something completely different with my style to go off in a kind of left field? Or do you maybe have to look at maybe creating other blogs, other outlets for that?
Oh yeah, I've every now and then I'll just say like, oh, I have to do this or I have to do one of these. And so let's see, one good example of that is I was stuck in an airport in 2012, I think. And I was just trapped there overnight. And I fired up my laptop and I started to write little poems about all the people I was trapped in the airport with. And so I put out a book of poetry just sort of randomly a few years ago, which has nothing to do with graphs or charts or anything. But it just felt like something I wanted to get out and get done. And sometimes you're just trapped in weird situations and you start making interesting art or painting funny things. And I've got drawers and drawers of just odd stuff that I've painted and doodled and made, but it doesn't live anywhere. And I think even if I never share it with anyone, just getting it done was a good exercise for my brain.
When you elected the being a kind of full-time artist become that was the job, when did that transition happen for you?
When I started the Index blog, I was working as a copywriter in advertising, and slowly over time I got more and more jobs on the side with Indexed until that really just sort of teeter-tottered me out of advertising and into drawing silly cartoons on the internet.
And did you do the big gesture of going into the office that Monday morning and saying, I quit, I'm out? Or was it a gradual thing where you kind of looked to reduce the amount of time you were doing the advertising, the copywriting work, and then it just felt natural, okay, that's it, I'm out now?
Yeah, so I've worked at a bunch of companies that have gone under. And so the last company that shuttered its offices, I was just like, okay, well, I'm laid off, but I make too much money to get unemployment. So I guess I'll just keep doing this. And it was really sort of easy because I'd been at that point like, oh, I'd love to just not do this anymore. And I didn't have to quit. They closed the shop.
What would you say is your biggest strength and also your biggest weakness as a creative person?
Sometimes I can get really sort of bogged down in details or how does this work and how does this work? And I'll just fiddle with one corner of something way too long and not realize that it's not working at all. And usually if I just step away from something and do something completely different, I'll figure out what's working and how to get going on it. But I think that's one of my weaknesses. I just keep sort of circling around an idea too long. And probably one of my strengths is that I just keep generating stuff. And it's almost like the weird opposite of hoarding, where instead of just collecting things, I just keep generating things. And that's probably the best thing I have going for me.
Can you tell us about a time where you worked on something, maybe worked on a project, you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took from that experience?
So I have to say the first book I did was when the blog to book thing was going on in around 2008. So it wasn't really a book. It was like a coffee table, like gift book of just collections of images from the blog. And I was really excited about that. And I was learning all I could about publishing because I had no idea what I had gotten myself into here. And I figured out a lot of things and I was all ready to go. And then boom, the economy just went flatline. And my editor left, my publicist left. There was nobody at the publisher anymore to like back up this weird little book. And I just felt like I had all this stuff and I didn't know what to do about it. And the book floundered and it was really weird. But because I learned all of that weird stuff and I knew how to do the promotional stuff and the back and forth and the marketing and things like that, the next book that came out, I was ready. So it was sort of a big letdown, but it was also, I learned so much for the next one.
And I can't remember, just checking just now, but the more recent books that you've done, have they been published through a publishing, through a house, or have they been through kind of self-published?
So the first book was through Penguin, and the next two were through Workman. And The Hustle Economy, which is sort of a collection of essays from various creative people about how to sort of function in this weird new world, that was put out by 10 Speed, which is part of Random House.
So these are all significant publishers then. How did it feel kind of working, as a creator, working with those publishers? How did you get on in terms of the timescales that they gave you, the deadlines that they gave you, or were you very kind of natural to that because of your background in advertising and copywriting?
I have to say the timelines for books are a lot more generous than the timelines for advertising. So advertising would be like, I need 80 headlines by tomorrow to throw at the client. I could be like, all right, let's do that. And with books, they would be like, all right, so it's March. How about you send us something in August? And I would just be like, wow, that's a lot of time. And I'd have to move it up. I'd say, how about I get you something in May instead? Because I don't think I can have that deadline hanging over my head like that. It would drive me nuts.
Is that I'm trying to remember the name of that law. Is it Parkinsons Law, where stuff expands to fill the time available?
Oh, it does. And like I said, I would just circle something, and I would probably drive myself nuts if I had more time to drive myself nuts about it.
And what about, tell us about an insight or a light bulb moment in your life and your kind of creative work and your creative journey where you went, okay, this is maybe a new direction I want to be going with my work, or you just had some, just some kind of insight. You went, okay, this is a key distinction I've made.
Yeah, I have to say, when I was in advertising, there's a very distinct voice in most advertising. That's sort of like, this is how advertising sounds and works, and this is the tone it takes, and it's always positive, and it's always aggressive, and it's always imperative, and just that voice. And for the longest time, I was practicing getting really good at that voice. And this is going to sound really obvious, but there are so many other voices to use words around. And even just reading more fiction and reading more experimental things and interesting stuff on the internet, and finding that it's really fun to play with voices that are not professional. And just because they're not that narrow sound doesn't mean that they're not as valid.
So did you have to go through like a program of deprogramming where you had to kind of get rid of all that
I had
stuff?
to sort of take myself out of advertising world and say, you know what, there are lots more ways to. And in advertising too, a lot of people are like work for your portfolio, build your portfolio, do all these pieces, and then you realize there are millions more ways to be creative than an advertising portfolio. And all those different ways can say so much more. And that was, I mean, kind of a obvious, but after you've been in a business like that for so long, you start to kind of believe that your job is supposed to be one way.
It's funny, as you're saying that just now, I'm reminded of a time in my life when I was working on having to do a lot of web copy for a particular thing we were launching. And you're right, you kind of get your mind into a certain way, it's a certain voice, and at the end of it, I almost found myself talking to my partner in that voice, because you learn to. It's almost like, okay, the point of this sentence is to get them to read the next sentence, which is to get them to read the next sentence, which is like a horrible way of living in the world if that's the way you speak normally, and I don't advise it to anyone. So I think
I had at one point I was writing a lot of text for a bank, and then all of a sudden I was writing a lot of text for a lingerie company, and the audiences were completely different, and I felt myself like flipping between brands, and I was just like, these people are crazy, like everyone's insane, like none of this sounds right, because the little voices that I was like putting into Word documents just were so just at odds with each other.
There's the wrong voice. What is in the hustle economy? There's lots of these short kind of pieces about advice on transforming creativity into a career. But what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received about living a happy and a creative life?
The best I ever got was, don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to what you want to be. Because a lot of people will come and say, well, you could be this and you could do this as a company and turn this into that. And you kind of think like, well, that's their plan for what they're doing. And their life sounds insanely stressful. And I don't think that's for me. And being able to know when you hear something, you're like, that's not for me. That's a really powerful sort of angle to take on things, and knowing yourself enough to not do the things that you don't want to. Absolutely.
It's funny. I think of that every time I watch a Gary Vaynerchuk video, which is all about hustle. Actually, it's about hustle, it's a certain type of hustle and everything. And I love his stuff, but it's like, that's great, and that's absolutely not me.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of being confident in that it's not wanting to do the comparison thing.
Yeah, and knowing too, like people are happiest when they're doing what works for them, and no two people are going to have the exact same wants and desires if they honestly break it down. I mean, not everybody wants to be an 80-hour-a-week, aggressive, always-on person. Some people would really like to just think and be quiet and take a slower pace, and that's okay too. But then sometimes you hear the this is how I did it sort of stories, and they all have this sort of ring of like, I'm very dedicated, I'm full of passion, and I do all this, and it becomes really buzzwordy and it rings hollow.
Yeah. So on that note, actually, do you want to share maybe a habit or a ritual that you think contributes to your success? And I'm conscious now you're going to tell me that you get up every morning at 5 a.m. to run for 15 miles or something.
No, but I do have a sort of a similar experience there. I have a 3-year-old, and in the morning when I drop him off at school, we stop by the bakery because he's a very picky eater. And getting him to eat a donut is a big deal, and that's a win. So we take him to the bakery every morning. He has a donut. We hang out on the bench outside, and we talk about whatever 3-year-olds like to talk about, which is everything from Spider-Man to how to throw rocks to all sorts of things. And then we hop on the bus, and I drop him off at his school, and then I walk back home. So I have about a 3-mile walk, and it's really leisurely, and it's just enough time for me to sort of think through, okay, here's my list of things to do today. Here's who I need to talk to. Here's what's going to happen. And by the time I get home, I'm ready to go.
You're ready to go. All because of, thankfully, a donut as well. It gives you that little bit of energy. Yeah.
Right. And I never would have planned it that way. And I'm not sure what he's going to do once he goes to kindergarten and we don't get a donut every morning, but it's a really good pattern to have fallen into.
Do you have an online resource or a tool or a mobile app like an Evernote, for example, that you love and you find really useful for the work you do?
I have to say that of all the things, people are really big on hating on Twitter right now, but Twitter has been extremely useful in finding interesting, wonderful people. And it's surprisingly easy to just sort of reach out to somebody and say, I love your work. Thank you for doing it. I'm really glad you're my Twitter friend. And just that little interaction that's so direct with so many people has been really nourishing and fruitful.
It is amazing. It never ceases to amaze me now that you can do that. You can read a book, finish the book, think, oh, that was a great book. I really enjoyed that. And just be able to reach out, something that was, you might have, I suppose some people that are really dedicated would have written a letter to a publisher, and that letter may have made itself to the author, but now you can just have that immediate. And so obviously I'm guessing you have that coming the other way for people that are reading your work, looking at your work and giving you that feedback.
Yeah. And it's really, it's sort of a reminder that you're not just working in a vacuum and you're not just shouting into a void. When you do interact with real people, there are people on the end of every little avatar. And it's really neat to know that, okay, I'm doing something right here. This is good.
And if you could recommend just one album to our listeners and also one book to our listeners, what would they be?
The book that I was reading recently is called The Goldfinch. It's about a piece of artwork and the impact of the artwork on this person, and it's got bombs and adventure and like the art world and intrigue, and it's a really neat novel. So I would say that one is my fun book lately. And then an album. Gosh, I'm so into just Spotify anymore. I don't know if I've bought an album in years.
Do you have a favorite playlist on Spotify? Maybe what is the thing that kind of is going on in the background when you're working, or maybe when you finish work and you're just kind of having it there, and you're kind of relaxing. What's that favorite playlist?
That would be, let's see, I've got on this computer, I have Pandora that has this thing called Thumbprint Radio, where you vote up and vote down things, and then it just starts to get to know you.
Thumbprint Radio, I'd never heard of that before.
It's really weird. So it takes everything you've ever listened to that you like or don't like and makes a playlist based on that. It's really kind of spooky how intuitive it is.
Because I remember when those first kind of recommendation engines came around, they were not particularly subtle in terms of your suggestions. But obviously, it sounds like they're getting much better now.
They are, and I can sort of leave it on and be like, "Oh, I really like that song," and I'm like, "Wait, it knows I will," because it's trained on like hundreds of votes over the last like 6 years. That's really weird.
And let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you've got all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you. You know no one. You have to restart. What would you do? How would you restart?
The one thing I would do differently is I'd probably use a male pseudonym.
Why would you use a male pseudonym?
I think it's just because the internet attracts sort of that trolley population, but I have gotten a lot of really creepy stuff that I don't think I would if my name were like John or Henry.
So you'd have to have that pen name that you use.
Yeah, I think if I had to start over, I would definitely run that experiment.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today as well. We're going to have all the links to the books that you have and obviously the blog, the index blog as well. What is the best way then for people to connect with you? I think I'm going to guess what that is now, but what is the best way for people to connect with you and learn more about your work?
Oh, absolutely. Come to me on Twitter and be my Twitter friend. I am at Jessica Hagy. It's pretty easy to find me. I'm the little elf face.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing about your work and your creativity. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to reading seeing your artwork for many, many years to come.
Oh, thank you very much.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.